Thanks for coming. Today we have Frank Satusky joining. Thank you so much for joining. So Frank Satusky has been Director of Network Strategy at Porter Airlines since 2023, bringing over 15 years of experience in the Canadian aviation industry to his current role. Frank is responsible for leading the development and implementation of Porter's network strategy across North America for its rapidly growing fleet of Embraer E195 E2 and the Havilland -400 aircraft. Frank is also responsible for setting the vision for the airline's growing bases across Canada in coordination with commercial and operational groups across the airline, and for managing the relationships with key airport partners. Prior to his time at Porter, Frank worked in progressively senior roles in network planning, alliances, and commercial strategy at both Air Canada and WestJet, giving him a broad understanding of the Canadian aviation landscape. Frank started his career in banking at TD Bank Group before moving to aviation and holds a bachelor degree from York University in Toronto, Canada. Thanks for joining. I'm looking forward to it.
Thank you. I'm first of all pleased to be here today, and thank you. I know it's end of term, and we're just talking about how everybody just wants to get the hell out of here at the end of the term. So thanks for sticking around. Hopefully this is enlightening and interesting for you. So my role at Porter is largely on the commercial side of the business. So deciding where we fly, building the schedule, doing both financial analysis and operational analysis of both the range of the aircraft and how much money we can make flying them to different destinations. It's a good job in that it covers a lot of different aspects, probably all aspects of the airline. I have to work with airports, I have to work with our revenue management team, maintenance, you name it. We got to deal with a little bit of everything, so it's a good role. What I have here today to walk you through, I'm going to talk a little bit about Porter, our history, how we got to where we are today. I'm going to talk a bit about the Canadian landscape, what's happening in aviation in Canada, lots is happening. Talk about how we've grown our network in the past couple of years and where we fly. And then the last section I have is from a different presentation, but it's on how we plan the network, so more of the mechanics around it. I'm going to try and breeze through the slides as quickly as possible so that I can leave lots of time for questions, because I feel you'll probably have more questions than I have answers for in the presentation. So let me start. So I like to call this reintroducing Porter, because I'm sure there's people in the room who have flown Porter. I'm sure there are people that haven't. I'm sure there's people that have flown Porter from Billy Bishop Airport on a -8. And there's those of you who might not even know that we now have 43 jet aircraft, and a significant number of them based out of Pearson Airport. So what's the history of the company? So the company was started in 2006. And we started at the Toronto Island Airport. At that time, there was just a very small terminal there and just a couple of flights a day on Air Canada to Montreal and a couple of flights a day to Ottawa. So it was very underutilized as a resource in Toronto. Our founders are today, our chairman and our CEO are both were the two co-founders of the company. They saw a vision there to build an airport terminal and to grow a regional airline out of Toronto Island using the -400 aircraft. So that was 2006. The airline grew to 29 -400 aircraft over that period. And in 2015, the next sort of game changer for us was the opening of the tunnel at Billy Bishop. Up until then, I'm sure if you've been out there, you've seen the ferry going back and forth. That was the only way to get there. And for those of you who ever arrived at the ferry just as it was pulling out of the dock, the tunnel was very much appreciated when that opened, and it was a real game changer. So it's one of the few airports in the world, definitely North America, that you can walk to. You can, from downtown, from Union Station, you can walk to the airport in probably 40 minutes. So definitely a game changer, and that's where we started. The slide fast forwards to 2023, but of course, what happened in between 2015 and 2023 was COVID. And during that period, Porter actually shut down basically for an 18-month period. We didn't have any scheduled flights. We laid off 90% of our employees. And during this period, our executive team, who remained employed, decided, since they had a lot of time on their hands, to talk about what the Porter of the future could look like. And around that time, there was not a lot of airlines ordering new aircraft. A lot of airlines were retrenching and thinking about what does the future hold. They had the vision of building a national airline, though. So kudos to them. They reached out to a couple of aircraft manufacturers. The most interested one was Embraer in Brazil. They built a new aircraft, the E195 E2, part of the E2 range. So they have 90, which is smaller, and the E95. And they were very eager to find a launch customer in North America. No one in North America had ordered them. There were some orders in Europe from KLM, in Brazil from Azul. So there's a few airlines around the world, but no major North American carrier had ordered a single one of these. So we ordered them, and we got a great deal on them. So it started off as a firm order for 35 and 65 options. It was subsequently increased to 50 aircraft and still 50 options, and now we're at 75 firm orders and 25 options, of which we've received 42 as of today. So it's been a crazy couple of years at Porter, very interesting couple of years. We started with the jets out of Pearson and out of Ottawa, flying primarily to Western Canada and some flights to the Western US and Southern US, namely Florida. We now serve 6 airports in Florida, we serve 4 in California, we fly to Phoenix, we fly to Vegas, Calgary, Edmonton, Vancouver, Saskatoon, Winnipeg, St. John's, Halifax. Can run them all off, but we're up to, we have now increased, we're now at 30, well, we were at 36 destinations until yesterday when we launched Palm Springs, which was number 37. So like I mentioned, we're up to 71 aircraft, 29 -8s, and 42 Embraer E2 aircraft. We carried about 7 million passengers last year, which is about 3 times as many as we carried prior to the pandemic. We are now over 4,000 employees in the company, and I was told actually not to use this slide because it changes so quickly that it gets out of date really quickly. So we'll be at 72 aircraft in another week or two, and probably at about 5,000 team members within the next few months. So crazy, crazy growth, but very exciting. One thing, I've worked for 3 airlines, as was mentioned. One thing I've heard the most at Porter is I love Porter, which is, it's great to work for a company when people actually love it. So I hear that a lot. We bring an elevated economy experience, so our goal is not to pack as many seats on the plane as possible at the lowest fare. We believe that the Canadian marketplace, there's demand for a more premium product, which people are ready to pay a little bit more for. So we have, and we see this in our customer service scores. We're over 80% favorable ratings from our passengers, which is very high in the airline industry. And our motto is actually enjoy economy. Very simple. And by the way, this is Mr. Porter, in case you weren't aware. And Mr. Porter is indeed a raccoon. Why did we choose a raccoon as our mascot? Because a raccoon's a scrappy animal. Not because he goes through garbage, but because they're very scrappy, and we're a scrappy brand. So, another feature of Porter which our customers appreciate is no middle seats. All of our aircraft have 2x2 seating. I guess if we ever get wide-body aircraft at a later date, that might be a bit challenging, but with the way our aircraft are built, it's 2x2 seating, no middle seats on both the E2s and on the -8s. Free Wi-Fi. You might have seen this week, Air Canada has once again copied us, and they'll be introducing free Wi-Fi next year. We're the original, so there's free Wi-Fi on all of our E2 aircraft. It's fast, it's free. I use it to work when I travel, which is great, except I miss the days of not having to work while I'm on a plane, so that's not good. So sorry about that. Free drinks with every fare. So we're the only Canadian airline serving, probably the only airline in North America serving beer and wine in glassware to every passenger on board the aircraft. We have a range of local products, so we just signed a deal with Moosehead. We used to have Steam Whistle beer, now we've moved to Moosehead, and we have Jackson Triggs wine from Ontario, along with, of course, tea and coffee and soft drinks, all included with your fare. And premium snacks. So we have a number of premium snacks from some high-quality vendors across Canada, You know, and part of our offering is if you want one, take one. If you want two, take two. We're not, we create a premium environment where help yourself, whatever you want, ask for it, we've got it. On top of that, we also have fresh, healthy meals. So we actually have an interesting model. Our aircraft doesn't have ovens. This is actually a weight savings for us, so there's an environmental impact, of course, and a bit of a cost savings, but we have some really good fresh, cold bowls and salads and that sort of thing. These are available for purchase. If you have a Porter Reserve fare, which I'll just walk you through that in a second, it's included. It's also very reasonable to buy, and Porter Classic fare, it's $9 or $10, so it's, and they're tasty. I like them. So yeah, our Porter Classic fares include all the things I mentioned, the free beer and wine, premium snacks, middle seat. You can choose whether you buy a fare. If you don't have a checked bag, you don't need to pay for it. So we'll have fares without checked bags. If you don't care about which seat you're in, you can save a bit of money there too. So we're doing fare classes within there, and the fresh meal options. Again, if you don't want a fresh meal, you don't have to pay for it in Porter Classic. If you do, they're available for purchase. Porter Reserve is our all-inclusive fare, which gets you an extra legroom seat at the front of the aircraft. It gets you 2 checked bags. It gets you a free meal. Gets you everything, basically. And it's actually, I think, one of the best values in the sky, because it's not that much more expensive than our classic fares. And we're seeing some very good uptake on that. So here's the aircraft. This is the E2. So as I mentioned, the Porter Reserve section is right at the front of the aircraft. 36-inch seat pitch. We have some stretch rows, we call them, where if you want a little bit of extra room, you can pay a few bucks more. I think it's like 20 or 30 bucks, depends on the stage length. And that'll get you a stretch seat, and the rest are at 30-inch pitch, which is fairly competitive in the marketplace for an economy seat. It's also being 2x2 seating, everything just feels a little bit more spacious on board. You don't have to, especially if you're not in the middle seat. Currently, we have 42 of these with 75 firm orders for this aircraft. Since this is an engineering group, I can talk a little bit about some of the challenges we've had with the aircraft. First of all, it's a great aircraft. Reliability is really good. The range is incredible. Our longest route last summer was Montreal, San Francisco, which is a 6.5-hour block time. So the basis of these aircraft historically was as a regional aircraft doing short flights. These are capable of doing quite a bit. 6.5 hours is probably about the edge of the range. One of the challenges we've had is with the engines. The engines are a geared turbofan engine built by Pratt & Whitney. It's the same engine that's on the A220, which is the Bombardier C-Series old, which became the A220, and then the 320neo from Airbus. And it's a problematic engine. They have some sort of bearing failure which happens, and it starts with an oil leak, so it'll get us some sort of warning that there's oil leaking. The plane then, when it lands, is grounded. They do an engine bore scope, and many times they find that they need to replace the engine at that point. So approximately 15 to 20% of the worldwide Pratt GTF fleet is grounded. There's some airlines who have 40 aircraft grounded as a result. JetBlue, for example, they've actually deferred orders of 320neos because they said we don't want to take planes that are just going to break, and they're actually keeping older planes longer. So yeah, a bit of an engineering challenge. What we're told is that there's no permanent fix yet determined. So right now we repair them, and then they can fail again. So the good news is no risk to safety. It's not the sort of thing where you have an in-flight shutdown of an engine. It starts with this leak, and then before it gets any worse, the engine is removed from the aircraft. So that's the only negative stuff I want to say in here. That's the biggest challenge we've had, I would say, since we've started out service. Otherwise, the aircraft's great. And then, of course, the Dash 8. So if you've flown on the island, you've flown on the Dash 8. It's the only aircraft, only turboprops are allowed to fly out of that airport. We currently have 29 of them. They're, some of them are from day one of Porter, so they're 18, 20 years old at this point. So eventually they will be replaced. We'll talk a little bit about the sort of the future of Toronto Island Airport later in the presentation and what happens to the Dash 8s as well. And then we won awards. not surprising. Quite happy to see some of these awards we've won, both from travel agents and then from passengers. We've won, the latest one was the Skytrax Best Regional Airline in Canada, which is good to see. So I'll jump ahead. I want to get into a little bit what's happening in the Canadian aviation landscape. So a lot has changed. Obviously, COVID hit the travel industry and the tourism industry extra hard and hit airlines extremely hard. A lot of airlines shut down completely, as we did during the pandemic. A lot of aircraft were retired by airlines around the world. Some airlines looked at it as an opportunity to retool and order new aircraft. Some of them just shrunk a bit in size and tried to save costs really quickly while they were shut down. So where are we today? What we're seeing is that airlines in Canada are flying larger aircraft with lower seat mile costs. So what that means effectively is you're seeing bigger aircraft with more seats, which brings the average cost per seat down, which allows us to make a bit more money as airlines. So you're seeing bigger aircraft everywhere. You're seeing markets that might have had smaller aircraft flying 5 times a day, now flying bigger aircraft 3 times a day. So you'll see a lot of that, which in some ways creates less congestion in airports because you have less overall flights, but in some ways also creates more congestion because now you have bigger planes all arriving at once and pushing more people through the terminal. So it's a bit of an adjustment. And I presented at an airport conference last week, and there was one thing airports expressed a lot of concern about is how now the peaks are bigger and the congestion is bigger in airports, so they've had to adjust the way they allocate slots. Another piece is that large markets have recovered capacity and smaller markets have not. So a city like Toronto or Montreal or Vancouver, they're generally in the 90%, called 90 to 100% of pre-COVID capacity, while smaller airports in Canada are at about 70%. So a lot of the regional markets have suffered as a result of the pandemic and not being able to spool up. A lot of that's driven by lack of pilot resources, particularly on the regional side. So a lot of pilots retired and trying to get more pilots trained up and fly regional aircraft. It's just hard to do and hard to find. So that's been a big challenge. The corporate travel market, business is not back since pre-pandemic. I think Zoom calls and Teams calls have replaced a lot of in-person meetings, and we see that. A lot of airlines see that. So at the same time, the demand for premium economy traffic has grown. So more people are traveling, less corporate but more leisure, and they're demanding a bit more of a premium experience and premium destination. So that kind of plays into what we're doing really well right now. Another piece is the strong operational performance is harder, so it's harder to find staff at airports, it's harder to find mechanics, it's harder to find people, period. So it's hard to deliver on a strong operational performance. That continues. It's getting better though as we go. I think a lot, the stories of airport meltdowns and operational meltdowns and all that stuff are 2 years ago, 1 or 2 years ago. And then just from a competitive standpoint, Air Canada today is smaller than they were pre-pandemic. They were one of the airlines that actually retired a lot of older aircraft when the pandemic hit, including 25 767s, which that's a 282-seat aircraft. That's a lot of capacity coming out of the Canadian market. So today Air Canada is about 7 or 8% smaller than they were pre-pandemic, which is big considering they are the largest airline in Canada by a long shot. However, a lot of that's been offset by our growth, by ultra low-cost carriers growing, and some foreign carriers growing in Canada. And then airline partnerships are key. So, Air Canada, if any of you are Aeroplan members, that's a great program. I'll give them credit. They have a lot of partners, and that helps when it comes to redemption and earning miles, and kind of virtually expands their network. For us, that's a focus going forward, and I have a little bit on that later. I'll just pause for questions if there's anything at this time. What?
Just a question about the corporate travel market point. I've heard, and maybe you can confirm this, that business class is the most profitable seat for most airlines that have business class. So if you have fewer people flying business, like how does that affect the future of the airline industry in general if they're losing a big segment of their most profitable customers?
Good question. I think the offset on that has been the increase in premium leisure demand has filled up a lot of those business class seats. So you have a lot of people who in the past would have gone on vacation to Europe in the summer and just flown in economy, and now they're buying up to premium economy or buying up to business class. So I think that's kind of been an offset where you really see the impact of the lower corporate demand as sort of the off-peak seasons. So historically, you'd always say in Canada that September is back to business. That's when you'd see business traffic spike back up. So leisure traffic drops off after the summer peak, business traffic takes off. What we're seeing in the numbers is that that business traffic doesn't come back, and the leisure traffic, although it's probably stronger than it historically was, isn't enough to offset it. So we end up with really strong July, really strong August, Labor Day, demand goes down. And it's similar also after like the winter peak in March, like you'd expect like, April, May to have strong business travel demand. That's when people do a lot of business travel. It's still there. It's just the numbers are not as high. So that's where we see the impact overall. The Canadian market's always been very seasonal, but you see it even more now because of the changes in corporate.
I had a question about the first point you mentioned. So since other competitors of Porter are using bigger aircrafts, how does Porter stay competitive with the other competitors who has lower seat mile costs?
Yeah, I think I think it comes down to market selection for us. So where the toughest routes for us are say like a Toronto, Vancouver, where you got 4 airlines flying, you got Air Canada flying everything from big wide body aircraft all the way down to us flying and WestJet flying smaller jets. Those ones are tougher, but what we're starting to see is that because people are willing to pay a premium for what we offer, we can offset that seat mile cost difference through more revenue. Where the sweet spot for us though is in the markets where there's not a ton of competition and where they're thinner because it's a smaller aircraft. So, if you have a 200-seat aircraft, it's 200 seats to fill. It's hard on a thinner market. So, Palm Springs is a great example. Launched it this week. It's not a high volume market by any means. It's a bit of a niche market, but it's a high yield market. Fares are high, and our 132 seats fits really well. So it is a bit of a challenge, but we're not trying. We'll have to be as an airline in Canada, you have to be in Toronto, Vancouver. That's just it's a flagship route. Toronto, Calgary, you have to be in that. I don't think those will ever be our most profitable routes, but there's going to be a whole sort of subsection. That, if that's 10% of our network, the other 90% will be, hopefully, we have markets where we have a bit of a niche there. We'll see. Got a lot more jets coming, so we'll see. Keep going. Just one last piece on the industry capacity. So what you can see here is international traffic has largely rebounded. So this is the seat capacity versus 2019. So 2024, number of seats in the Canadian market versus number of seats in 2019. So right now there's 6.2% more seats. And that was, you saw a lot of carriers increasing transatlantic capacity specifically in 2024 because demand in 2023 was so strong. So we don't participate in that part of the market, but the carriers that did reported really strong results on transatlantic in 2023. So they all ran back into the market in 2024 with more capacity. If you see their results in Q3 now, both from Air Canada and Air Transat, they struggled a bit because it went from, and this happens a lot in this industry, you go from under capacity to over capacity really quickly. So that's one area which I'm actually happy we don't participate on because it's ultra competitive right now and needs to kind of settle down. Every other part of the universe is smaller. So if you look at overall transborder capacity is down 2% and domestic capacity is actually down 11%. And a lot of that domestic reduction is driven by the corporate travel being down. So it's hard. You can. I always like to say you can stimulate traffic to Cancun in February. You can't stimulate traffic to Saskatoon. So nobody wants to go. If anyone here from Saskatchewan, with my apologies, but nobody wants to go. So without the business traffic, the only way to sort of reach profitable levels is to reduce capacity. So that's what you've seen a lot of that. What's really interesting for us at Porter is that if you look at Toronto and Ottawa being down both of around 9% in capacity, a lot of that's driven by WestJet retrenching more to the west of Canada. So that's why you're seeing Vancouver, Calgary closer to flat, which that's created an opportunity for Porter. So airfares out of Toronto and out of Ottawa are creeping up because capacity is tighter, but that does present an opportunity for us to grow. But overall, the capacity landscape is still, because the international's up, it's still roughly flat, but domestic and transborder is down.
Is the last one Edmonton?
Yes.
What's going on there?
Edmonton was kind of hit by a few different things, and I think the numbers this year will look a lot different, but WestJet had a low-cost division, Swoop, which they shut down, and about half of their fleet was based in Edmonton. And overall, WestJet has invested a lot more in Vancouver and Calgary, so that's largely driving it. It's also just Edmonton, by being the base for Swoop and then for Flair, it drove the yields down a lot in the market. So for Air Canada, for us, it's been a more challenging market versus Calgary, which is got a strong hub carrier in WestJet. Fares are a little bit higher. It's an easier market, but there's been a lot of ads going to Edmonton. So I think if you look at it 2025 versus 24, the numbers will be a bit different. So again, two great airports in Toronto. We are the only real major airline in Canada that's based in Toronto, so very proud to be the hometown airline and proud to serve the two airports. So out of Pearson, one of the big challenges at Pearson is it is a very full airport, so getting slots for landings, departures, it's tough on the runway. And then we also have to deal with constraints around Canada Customs, so CBSA, they have capacity constraints at certain times of day. US Customs also has capacity constraints, so it's like a bit of a minefield trying to add flights, which is probably the biggest challenge of my job, is navigating Pearson capacity. That said, we're now at a point where we are the second largest carrier within North America at Pearson, which is a big change from 2 years ago when we weren't even there. So pretty big growth. And overall in the Toronto area in terms of seat capacity, if you combine both airports, we are the second largest carrier across the board. So both airports remain important to us, but they both have different focuses. So out of the island, it's more of a short haul network, and out of Pearson, it's longer haul. We do have some short haul markets, but because the range of the jet is so much bigger, we can fly across Canada and the US, which we can't do out of the island. And yeah, so this just, here's the numbers behind it. So we out of Pearson, we now are at, this winter at 44 daily departures. Again, that was 0 at this time 2 years ago. So, we've come a long way, and we're targeting 50 daily departures by next summer to a total of 24 destinations across Canada and the US. So very rapid growth, and why I've been busy the last little while. And here's a list. So I got a few slides just to go through the network for each of the cities. So here's a list of cities that we're flying this winter. A lot of them are seasonal. So what we do is rather than try and fly everything on a year-round basis, we adjust the network summer to winter based on where people want to go. So a lot of the Florida airports, we serve 6 airports in Florida. 3 of them, Miami, Tampa, Fort Myers, 4, West Palm Beach are seasonal. We'll probably extend 1 more through next summer because there's still demand in the summer to Florida, even though it's oppressively hot. But people still go because a lot of Canadians do own homes in Florida, so they like to go even in the summer. And what you would see more is more domestic points in the summer is what you'll see. So there's some that we're considering for next summer, which are on the list, which will be in our network next summer. So it's a pretty extensive network and some interesting destinations. Again, all of this launched in the past 2 years. Ottawa is interesting for us. We were in the summer the largest airline in Ottawa. Air Canada this winter is slightly bigger, so we're kind of jockeying 1 and 2 right now. However, it's a pretty extensive network. I'll explain a little bit later about the hub and spoke model, but for Ottawa, it is a connecting hub for us. We take a lot of traffic, particularly from the west of Canada and the Atlantic provinces to Florida and to New York and Boston. And it works really well. People like connecting in Ottawa. It's a relatively small airport, easy to get through. So it's working really well for us, and yeah, the Ottawa market is great. I can't really say anything negative about it. It's been really good for us, and we'll continue to grow there in the coming years. Montreal, a much smaller operation and much more competitive. Air Canada is very large. In Montreal, they're at something like 70% of North American capacity. So it's harder to make inroads there. Our network is a bit smaller. That said, there's some markets where we've been able to grow and we're seeing some success. So, Fort Lauderdale is a huge market. Out of Montreal, it's probably the largest Canada-Florida market is Montreal, Fort Lauderdale. So we went in there and we're going up to 11 times a week by the peak of this winter, sort of daily right now, and then 11 by the peak. We're the only carrier flying to Fort Myers out of Montreal, and Vegas we launched also this winter. And the plan for those is winter seasonal. And then on the domestic side, we've served Montreal from Toronto Island and from Halifax for many years. And now we've added the Pearson flights, Vancouver, and Calgary to the mix. And in the summer, an Edmonton flight too. So still a relatively small network. Again, there's some more news on what we're doing in Montreal a bit later in the presentation. Halifax also, been great. Porter does really well in Halifax. It's been a long-term outpost for us. We've been using the Dash 8s, flying all the way up to St. John. So we've had these through flights that run from Toronto Island or Ottawa to Halifax, and then continue up to St. John. So one-stop service. That's been around for years for us. And this winter we added our first U.S. destinations, Orlando and Tampa. Overall to Florida, we're the second largest airline. To Florida, we're actually larger than WestJet is now from Canada to Florida. So that's why you see Florida a lot in these slides. So what's next? As if we don't have enough to do, we've decided to build an airport. We built a terminal in Montreal on the South Shore. So some of you may have seen this in the news. There's been an airport for many years in Saint-Hubert, which is a community on the South Shore of Montreal. It's had a very small passenger terminal, very limited service, but it's capable of handling a lot more. So part of our jet expansion was to do something bigger in the Montreal area. Montreal Trudeau Airport is quite constrained, so we decided to build our own. And not the first time we've done this. Of course, like the island operation was, we built that, we sold it, and the sale of the island airport in 2018 is partly what's funding our growth. Similar plan here. So we built an airport which is, we're building an airport which should open, I would say, we say second half of 2025, 2026-ish, as it lags, but it's been a great airport, great experience. We're trying to replicate the experience you have at the Billy Bishop Airport, where the time from curb to the gate is short, great environment, great retail, and really create a great experience there. So we'll continue to serve both airports in Montreal, but what's now branded Montreal Metropolitan Airport will be our focus going forward. So it's renamed Montreal Metropolitan Airport, which was followed by a lawsuit from Montreal Trudeau Airport, who said you can't use that name. So we'll see how that plays out, but yeah, that'll open soon.
What's Pascan?
Pascan is a regional airline that operates a lot of flights within Quebec. They operate small aircraft.
Like Gaspé?
Yeah, Gaspé. Yeah, they do, and they fly like in Quebec City. And so our goal is to work with them to offer connections into our flights to the west and to other parts of Canada.
Does Porter do anything with the ground transportation at the new airport, such as like the transit connections or other services?
Yeah, so it's not from us, but the airport themselves are going to be operating a shuttle from the airport. I think it's to the REM train, which is not, I think it's like 15-minute drive maybe, 10-15-minute drive. So that will be in place. I've asked that question too, and I've been assured it will be in place by the time we start the service. I think that it would be nice if the train went all the way to the airport. I think that would be a real game changer. Having lived in Montreal for many years, I know one of our challenges is going to be getting people downtown to cross over to the South Shore. The South Shore itself, though, has a large catchment of, call it almost 1 million people. So if that's all we take, that should still work. But part of our goal is to bring people from downtown into the South Shore into Montreal metropolitan. And then the other thing is what's happening at Billy Bishop. I love this photo. It shows how close it is to downtown. I had the privilege of attending a city council debate over the potential extension of the runway. If you haven't been to city council and seen a debate, it's very entertaining. You go from talking about runway extensions to stop signs in the same meeting. But it was agreed. So there's a couple things happening. All airports in Canada have had to extend their runways for what's called RESA, which is a runway extension safety area. So effectively what that means is if a plane has an incident, then there needs to be a runoff area, so call it like a gravel area so it doesn't slide into the lake. Seems like a good thing to do. But the debate at council, this has to be in place by, Transport Canada is mandating it has to be in place by 2027. Now, the airport lease itself, so the airport is governed by a tripartite agreement between Transport Canada, the City of Toronto, and Ports Toronto, which is a arm's length government agency. The agreement there was expiring in 2032, so it didn't make a lot of sense to extend the runway without extending the lease. So of course City Council voted to extend the runway without extending the lease. Then subsequently the next day in a further debate agreed to extend the lease another 10 years. So that was positive. Our goal at Porter is still to eventually be able to fly jets out of the island, which requires even a further runway extension. But if anyone has been following the story here, there's a whole camp who wants to turn the airport into a park. And there's a camp that sees the economic value that this drives for the city and wants to expand it. The jet ban at the island was originally because jets were noisier. They're actually not quieter than the Dash 8-400 just because of improvements in technology. So we're still hopeful that eventually we'll get there, but we'll see if that happens under the current city council if they approve that. So more to come on that one. Where that impacts us primarily also is that the Dash 8s, as I mentioned, are getting older. So what do we do with them? There's not a lot of options to replace them. There's not a lot of turboprops still in production. So we would like to fly jets out of the island. But before we make that decision, we have to be able to fly jets out of the island. So it's stay tuned. And then partnerships. So our biggest partner right now is Air Transat. We signed a joint venture agreement with them last year. And primarily that's to offer connections from points in Canada to Europe and also to the Caribbean, connecting our domestic network and US network to Europe and our domestic network to the South. It's working really well. I think there's a lot more upside that we can get out of it. Right now, partnerships are only about 6% of our overall traffic, so it's not huge. So we have the partnership with Air Transat, and we're adding more in 2025. The rest of these partners other than Air Transat are what we call interline partners, so they're not full partnerships. It just allows us to book a ticket, so say up to Icelandair, where you can fly from Toronto Island to Newark, and then Newark to Reykjavik on Icelandair. You can buy it on one ticket. But we don't actively promote it, so that's where there's sort of work to happen in 2025 and beyond to take these partnerships to the next level, where we actually promote the connections, where we price them more competitively, and get to a point where there's code share, so it's one airline's code all the way through. So that's one piece, and then the other is we recognize, I mentioned the Aeroplan, so we recognize our loyalty program needs enhancements, and that's what's coming also next year. where our plan is to roll out a loyalty credit card with a major Canadian financial institution, so you can earn what we call VI Porter points, and then use those to redeem on some of these other airlines, which again will help level that playing field with Air Canada, and hopefully bring some more business to us. So that's what we're working on on the partnership side, more for next year. So I would say we're in infancy. So another one I'll just mention there is Alaska. So Alaska's a really interesting airline. They're very big on the west coast of the U.S. So we started interline with them this year, and we're quite eager to get to a point where we're doing code share with them, because there's a couple advantages. One is we can tap into their network. So if you again want to fly from Toronto to LA to Hawaii, we'll be able to offer that seamlessly. And then the other piece is in the U.S., people don't know Porter. It's a big market. People don't know us. So if you're sitting in California and you're going to fly to Toronto and you don't know about Porter, our flights are actually now on Alaska's website. So if you want to book a ticket LA to Toronto on Porter, you can go on Alaska's website and you'll see that. So it increases our point of sale exposure in the U.S. and creates another distribution channel for us. So,
Are you interested in joining like one of the three alliances, like SkyTeam, or oneworld, or?
The question comes up a lot. I think right now we're happy where we are. So Alaska's in oneworld, Delta's in SkyTeam, JetBlue's non-aligned. Most of these carriers are non-aligned. I think we're better off just doing what we're doing for now, and then as things evolve, Star Alliance, Air Canada's in that, they're pretty established. WestJet has a pretty deep partnership with Air France-KLM and with Delta, so that's SkyTeam's probably already taken, so that leaves the One World Alliance for us, which is Alaska, American, British Airways, Cathay Pacific, those are the sorts of airlines that are in that alliance. So could I see us getting there at some point? Maybe, but right now I think it's better to play the field a little bit and have a range of partners. Okay, so that's my last section here. I want to talk a little bit about network planning, and these are slides I did and not our marketing teams. They're a little more plain. But I want to just sort of talk you through what my group does. So my department falls under a bigger group called Network Planning and Reporting. So I'm responsible for network strategy, and what that primarily means, as I mentioned, is we're doing the work around building the future schedules. We're doing all the coordination and communicating what our objectives are. So if we launch a route, we go out to the sales team, to the marketing team, to the revenue management team, and say, this is what we need for this to be a success. We're doing pieces around long-term operational coordination. What that means is, Pearson Airport, for example, is embarking on a massive expansion plan, so they want to know how big we're going to be 10 years from now. So we'll work with them on sort of planning that out so that they can adjust their plans accordingly, and that's true of pretty much every airport we operate in. We'll do analysis over fleet, so if we ever want to introduce a new fleet type, we'll do that analysis in my group. We manage the relationship with airport authorities, so everything from air service development, so launching new routes, to any of that long-term planning I mentioned, or last week I was on a call around improving our check-in at Pearson, so having new signage, a new slightly different setup there, so we get involved in that. On the software side, what we use, we're all Excel wizards, PowerPoint semi-wizards, and the software we use is for evaluating the network is something called Netline Plan. It's from Lufthansa Systems. It's the #1 system for this in the world. And effectively what it does is we take the demand and the revenue, they adjust that. They manage the schedule of publication, which is incredibly complicated. I'm glad I don't have to do that, especially when you're dealing with partners. When you have a network that has a lot of connections, you change the timing on one flight, that could impact connections, and then you have to rebook passengers. They deal with a lot of that. And then there's a lot of regulatory pieces. Right now for us, the biggest one is dealing with U.S. Customs and Border Protection, where they need to be notified of everything we're doing over and over again. So that takes a fair bit of time. So they're more focused on that. So they also use Excel, but the scheduling software we use is a software called Zulu. There's a whole slew of different ones in the airline industry, and I'll show you a screenshot on the next slide of what that software is. But it's effectively a pretty manual system where you see lines of flying and you adjust them accordingly based on what you see on your screen. Not a lot of automation built into that at most airlines. I even spoke to American Airlines, who have upwards of 1,500 aircraft, and I said, "You must have automation behind this." They said, "No," which was surprising. But in some ways, the industry is a bit archaic in the way you manage airline schedules, but that seems to be changing as a lot of machine learning comes into what airlines are doing in the coming years. And then there's a third part is the business intelligence team, which does a lot of our data mining. They're the Tableau and SQL experts who produce a lot of our reports across the company. And I would say it's not a big team. Between these three groups, there's maybe 12 people overall. In similar roles at a bigger airline, there could easily be 40, 50 people in these departments. So hope to grow the team in coming years. This was a slide we actually put in one of our board presentations to educate our board members who in theory know airlines really well, but we wanted to make sure that our understandings were aligned. Airlines generally operate either one of two basic models, which is a hub and spoke model where you bring a lot of flights in at one time a day and you connect them out to a whole other slew of flights that depart around a similar time of day. So that's one model. And the other is point-to-point, where airlines will just sell basically individual flights, and 100% of that is just purely local traffic. So, for example, you have a flight Toronto-Vancouver, and everybody on that plane is just flying Toronto to Vancouver, and that's it. We use both of these models in our network. So the hub and spoke model, it's very similar to what Air Canada does in Toronto, Montreal, Vancouver. WestJet does it in Calgary. And then Alaska, for example, does it in LA, Portland, Seattle, San Francisco. So they're bringing traffic in from a whole range of destinations, connecting them out to a lot of other destinations. The benefits of the hub and spoke model is that it allows you to kind of grow beyond the natural market size. So again, for using the Palm Springs example for us, the market from Toronto to Palm Springs isn't huge. Could it support, we were operating 3 times a week. Could it support 3 times a week? Maybe. How we offset that though is bringing in connections from from Ottawa, from Montreal, from Halifax into that. So it might still be 80% local, but that extra 20% is coming in with connections, which allows us to supports the connecting services, but also supports the main service. It also allows, once we get to scale, it allows us to keep the fares at a profitable level on the local point-to-point, because everybody wants a nonstop flight. People want to pay more generally for a nonstop flight. And then where we discount is in the connecting flows that come in. So this is why I'm sure many of you have seen situations where you can buy a flight from Toronto to Palm Springs for $300, but you can buy a flight Montreal, Toronto, Palm Springs for $200. And it's one of the great fascinations people have with the industry is why is that the case? It's for this exact reason, is that we need to, in order to optimize our profitability, we'll extract that premium for a nonstop flight, and for the connecting traffic where we're competing against 50 other options, we'll discount more. And then that also helps impact seasonality a little bit. So again, a route in the summer, if we continue Fort Myers into the summer, for example, we'll need some more connections because the market really shrinks a lot. And having the hub and spoke and bringing in traffic from other cities is the only way to support that without dropping fares to unsustainable levels. Point-to-point is a lot simpler overall. It allows you just to fly the planes hard. So you just keep flying back and forth, back and forth, and back and forth. You don't have to worry about connections. You don't have to worry about bank timings. It arguably reduces your operational complexity because you don't have all these planes coming in at once and then departing. So every departure needs gate agents, it needs ground staff. It needs gates, it needs all that support. If you're in a point-to-point system, you don't have to have all the planes on the ground at the same time. So you can have one crew do one flight, next one comes in to go to the next flight. So it's a little bit less complex and less complex to revenue manage. revenue management, they have some very sophisticated systems, very sophisticated modeling, but it makes it very complicated to manage, to optimize the profitability. If all you're doing is optimizing that leg, that Toronto-Vancouver leg, it's much easier. Then you just know your revenue, you know every ticket you sell, what it's going to be worth. So it reduces complexity, but it also takes away some of those advantages that you see on the hub and spoke system of building a network beyond the local market sizes. So right now for Porter, we're more hub and spoke in Ottawa, I would say. In Toronto, a little bit less so. That's partly driven by the slot availability at Pearson has been a little bit tougher. So we have some connections, but not a lot. And then towards the right there, if you go out to Halifax, we have almost no connections in Halifax. So, it's a bit of a different strategy depending on where we are. And what it means is that in a market like Halifax, the frequency that we fly, we have to be reliant on just the local demand from Halifax to where we're flying to. So you adjust your network accordingly. So different airlines do it differently. Some airlines, you can see even in Canada, it's a mix depending on the station. Some airlines are entirely point-to-point, so like Flair, for example, is entirely point-to-point. And some airlines are almost entirely hub and spokes, like Lufthansa might be a good example, where they have these fortress hubs in Frankfurt and Munich, and they do very little outside of that. So, it's both of their advantages and disadvantages. It's far less exciting than the food slides, I think, but I think it's interesting too. Here's an example of our Ottawa hub. So this comes out of our scheduling software, and this is what we call a hub view. So what you'll see on the left here is the arrivals coming in. So the column that's marked departures, DEP, that is the city that the planes are coming in from, and then on the next column over, that's the time they arrive. So what we do is we go down this list and say, okay, what do we want to connect to what? So we have a Calgary arrival at 1:51 p.m., Winnipeg at 1:51. Then we have a whole slew of other destinations that are arriving, and once you hit 4 o'clock, that's when the departures start going the other way. So what our job is to optimize this and make sure that what we want to connect connects. So knowing that there's a minimum connect time, in Ottawa it's 35 minutes on a domestic connection or an hour on a domestic to transborder or transborder to domestic connection, we build around that. So in this case, if you look at it, you'll see that right now in this schedule, this was just a sample, Halifax arriving at 15:18 doesn't actually connect to Lauderdale at 1600. And there's many reasons why we do that. Like, why wouldn't we have the connection there? If we push Halifax earlier, it might bust a connection in the morning off the first flight. If we move Fort Lauderdale later, the plane might get back too late to have any connection. So sometimes you have to make sacrifices in the schedule. This is what our software helps us sort of model what's the best option. Ideally, you want everything to connect to everything in a hub, but it's not always feasible. Yeah, and this allows us to sort of, we use this sort of view in addition to a whole bunch of other views to optimize the schedule and the aircraft flows and build a schedule out of that. One challenge also is you ideally want connections to be tight. I don't think anybody wants to sit around airports for 3-4 hours unless maybe you're in a fancy lounge or something. So you want them tight, but not so tight that if you're 10 minutes late, you misconnect. So it's a bit of a balance. And here, this is a snapshot of our scheduling software, and really it's built on, there's different views, but this is an aircraft flow view. So each of these lines that you see from the top down represents an aircraft and what it does during the day. So that first one at the top there, that plane starts at 7:40 a.m. in the morning in Calgary, lands in Ottawa at 1:51 p.m., sits for 2 hours and 24, holding for connections, and then it goes out to Ottawa at 4:15 p.m., gets into Halifax at 7 p.m., leaves Halifax 7:55 p.m., gets into Toronto at 9:29 p.m., and then flies off to Vancouver at 10:25 p.m. So as you can see, if that Calgary-Ottawa flight is late, it doesn't necessarily have an impact on the rest of the flights because there's a lot of time on the ground. But after that, why do flights get delayed? That's why they get delayed, because we're planning them all at 55, 56 minutes. So if that Ottawa-Halifax flight goes late, odds are that Halifax-Toronto flight will go late, and odds are that Toronto-Vancouver flight will go late. Question?
Yeah, question about this. So like I've heard that during the Great Southwest Meltdown a few years ago, part of the issue was the planes themselves were doing very complex routes, and if one part of the circuit got messed up, the whole got messed up. And is that, it seems like you're doing something similar. Is that a problem that all airlines have, where if you have a major snow event or something like that, theoretically the entire network could shut down and all you could have to cancel half your flights? Or was there something specific about Southwest, like Porter or Air Canada, or I don't know, somebody else really out?
Yeah, I think we could have the same issue. So if you think about it this way, like we have crew bases in a number of Canadian cities. We have a crew base in Toronto, Ottawa, Montreal, smaller one in Halifax. We've opened one in Vancouver. And what that helps us is in those exact situations where a flight's late, something goes wrong, the crew has hit their maximum duty day and they go home. There's more crews that you can then pull in. So that helps us. Now, if we are in a situation where there's a delay, like our network's a bit more resilient in that, let's say that if we go down to that line there where there's a Toronto-Edmonton. So if that plane gets to Edmonton and then the crew flies back Edmonton-Toronto, if it gets to Edmonton and then there's a blizzard hits and there's suddenly a 4-hour delay, well, we don't have another crew in Edmonton. So that crew, in theory, could say, you know what, we're walking. We've probably seen this. If you've ever been in a weather delay, the crew literally walks off the plane. Then it's a problem. But I mean, that's hard to avoid unless you have backup crews and everywhere. In Southwest's case, the problem is that they serve so many cities, and they did things in a very creative way where the plane would start its day in Miami, and then go to Atlanta, and then go to Kansas City, and then go to Dallas, and then go to Phoenix, and it just kept going. So there was a lot of single points of failure in that whole string. So when I saw that story, I looked at their schedule and I knew exactly what had happened. And it was exactly that, is that they had so many different cities that they were going to. Much more of our flying is just out and back, so it's a little bit simpler. And now they've had to adjust. The advantage for them and why they did that is because that allowed them to sell, Miami, Atlanta, Kansas City as, Miami to Atlanta, and then they could also sell that ticket as Miami to Kansas City via Atlanta. So that's why they did a lot of that, but it introduced all this operational complexity because they did that over and over and over again throughout their network. So hopefully we avoid that.
Yeah, I have a question. Like, when you make these schedules, do you also have to coordinate with the airports? Like, for example, if the airport is constrained with the number of takeoffs per hour or something?
Very much so. So we build our schedule of dreams, which is exactly the way we want it. Connections are optimized, timings are optimized. Then there's a process twice a year every season where we have to submit for a slot approval. So depending on the size of the airport, they either do that or they don't. So like an airport like Saskatoon doesn't do that. They just assume they can handle everything. Airport like Toronto, Vancouver, what's another one that does that? Montreal does that too, where we have to submit slots, and what happens is it becomes this negotiation back and forth, which right now we're in the middle of that for next summer. We submit a schedule, they send responses. They say, okay, you want a 10 o'clock departure? We'll offer you an 11 o'clock departure. You want a 3 p.m. arrival? We'll offer you a 5 p.m. arrival. Where that impacts us is that if in this case, this Toronto Edmonton over here, let's say, so this leaves at 7:40 in the morning. If they come back and offer us at 9 a.m., well, now the plane gets to Edmonton and it gets in too late to come back. So then we have to move the other flight. So it's this iterative process where you go back and forth with the airports. It's actually twice a year there's a slot conference. It's like it's a funny concept to me that it still happens, but it used to be you literally trade slots like on cards. Now it's all pretty much automated, so I don't know why a conference happens, we don't go. But right now we're debating, like for summer 25, we still have a bunch of slot issues at Toronto, which we are going back and forth, including that agency piece, having to deal with Canada Customs and deal with US CBP, so we might get the runway slot, but we don't get the CBSA or the CBP slot. So then they'll offer a time, but then we can't get the runway slot at that time. So it's a complicated and painful process, but yes, we do consult the airports through all of this.
Very interesting. Two questions. One, how complicated was it to get maintenance facilities at Pearson, especially with your expanding so much? And the second one, I was glad to see that the border crossing, the U.S. border crossing is coming to the island airport, which has always been a challenge. Is it why did it take so long, or is it the airport, or why? How did that happen?
Yeah, okay, so the first question around maintenance facilities, so we opened a hangar in Ottawa, which is sort of call it our primary maintenance facility on the U2, but we have more aircraft overhead at Pearson, so we needed to have a facility. We were kind of lucky in that a hangar became available. It was, if you know, in the infield of Toronto, there's the WestJet hangar, and then there's kind of two next to it. There was one that was leased to Sky Service, and they gave it up, and we were lucky enough to get that, which is huge. It's not big enough for all of our maintenance needs, so that's why we have to do maintenance in other stations. We're doing maintenance checks starting in January in Halifax. We're looking at doing some in Vancouver also, and when the maintenance happens is on overnights. So the aircraft will get in, goes in the hangar overnight, and then comes out in the morning. So we have facility at Pearson, but it was tough. It was a bit of a nail biter on whether we would get it or not, because other airlines were trying to steal it from us. So that happened. That happened a couple months ago. On the second question on US CDP at the island, there was a number of factors which delayed it. It's been an ongoing saga for, I want to say, 7 or 8 years. One of the big ones was staffing and getting the staffing put into place, even though it's built on a cost recovery model. So, ultimately, if you go through a U.S. pre-clearance facility, you pay for it as the passenger. They still didn't want to expand their staffing enough to support the operation. So then the airport didn't build a facility, didn't want to build a facility, because there's all sorts of requirements around the facility, and they need a little like jail or whatever in there too. So there's a lot of things which you have to meet. So they didn't build the facility. So now the staffing's coming online. They're working to build the facility to have it open by late 2025. Now with the new U.S. administration, let's see what happens. There might be less support for pre-clearance, because it's more benefit for Canadians, less so for Americans. We'll see.
Maybe we could wrap up in a few minutes.
Yeah, I know I'm talking so much, but here I'm almost done. So we have a couple more, a couple of things I want to just show you here. So, and this ties into a lot of what I've talked about already. So when we build a schedule, when we choose a market, it's based off of these commercial considerations and then the operational factors. So, this is all stuff I've talked about. When we choose a market, it's based on what's the market size, what's the fare potential, is it a high fare market, is it a low fare market, does it support our cost structure, what's the competition, what's the cost in the airport. Some airports are very expensive, particularly in Canada. And then what's the seasonality? Is this a market we want to fly year round, or do we want to just fly it seasonally? And then we have to balance that with a lot of the operational pieces. Again, a lot I've talked about. So airport slots, gate availability, Canada Customs, US CBP, the range of the aircraft. So there's stuff, if we wanted to fly to Europe, we wouldn't be able to today because the aircraft wouldn't make it. So there's things we have to factor in, and certain things like payload. So, in the summer out of Las Vegas, we had to cap the passenger load because it was hitting like 48, 50 degrees in the summer heat. So there's things like that we have to factor into. So all of that comes together, and that gives us this market that we launch, whatever it is, and we do evaluations on a whole slew of different markets. So for next summer, I've got a bunch on the list. Some we've dropped, some we've added, and we'll see how it all pans out. And then this, I think, is my last slide actually. So then, again, so what are the best markets for us? Large market size and high fares. Check mark. Low competition, check mark. It's I showed this slide to our revenue management team, and they said, yeah, obviously. But these are the sort of magic bullet markets that we look at, where they're underserved, There's more demand than capacity. The fares are high. There's not a ton of competition. And that for us, an example of that was Toronto to Phoenix, where Air Canada has been the only carrier serving that one. Lynx Air went in briefly, but then they went under. And it's a pretty big market. So if you look at March 2024, there was demand for 364 passengers a day each way from Toronto to Phoenix, but only 300 seats. So that meant that the market was what we call spilling. So it was spilling to one-stop options, connecting options, all of that. And because of that, the fares were higher. Whenever the demand outstrips the supply, the fares are higher, which made it an attractive market for us. We launched in October. It's been profitable from day one for us. So that's kind of the magic bullet for us, and we'll keep looking for markets like that as we go. More the merrier. And that's it. So thank you.